All right, everybody, we're going to be working on the Chapter 15 exercises part 1. Before we begin, I just want to make sure that you guys have all your stuff up and open. So open up whatever IDE you're using, probably Eclipse. I've got my book up on the screen. I've got my auxiliary code editors and all my resources all set to go here, my file windows. And where you guys should begin with this is with a little bit of file management. Now, the one approach that you can use, so for example, I'm going to pull over my file window here. And I tend to store everything in my Google Drive. And the one tendency that you might typically have when doing this stuff is to go to whatever folder you're working in and then maybe pre-create your project. But I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do the file management manually, but I do want to show you that I know where my workspace is and how to get there. Now, from the product itself, when I create a new Java project and give it a name. Now, since we're working on Chapter 15, I'm going to call this Chapter 15 Part 1, because I know there's a Part 1 and a Part 2. So I'm just naming it, so it makes sense to me. And then I'm going to go ahead and click Finish. As I do that, not only does it create a project node here in the Package Explorer, but I'm going to have you notice that in my file window now, that it also created a Chapter 15 Part 1 project folder here. And I'm letting Eclipse do that for me automatically. It just makes sense because it keeps track of everything that way for me. All right, I'm going to begin by closing some of these excess windows here. You're going to notice I'm not going to close all of them. I'm going to leave one open because I'm going to steal some stuff from it, basically. But I'm going to come to the new Chapter 15 source folder, right-click, and I'm going to begin by creating a new class file so we can create a new program. We're working on exercise 15.1 to begin with. I am going to initiate the public static void main and click Finish. I'm also making sure, by the way, that I don't have a package declaration here. If you create it for the first one, you're going to create it for all of them in here. I'm deciding not to, so I'm leaving it blank. What ends up happening is then you're using what they call the default package, which is unnamed. As we typically do with all the GUIs, is we're going to do the extends application. And you can see how routine this has become now. We're going to drop in our libraries, and I'm hoping you guys know how to do that step now all on your own. And then hover over the class name to add the unimplemented method, which is the start method. I am moving the main method to the bottom, which is just my habit. Doesn't have to be yours, by the way, but that's just how I prefer to work. And then I will put in the launch directive here with the semicolon at the end of the line, right? So I don't forget, because you guys saw last week, I can forget that. That's an easy one to forget. We know we're creating a GUI program right off the bat, so let's go to a previous program and get the stage, the scene, and all that, as I always say. And let's paste that into our app at the bottom of the start method. Realizing that, okay, we can change the title now. That's not a big deal. But we don't know exactly what panes we're using or what size they're going to be yet. So that's okay that we don't know that. I do want you to notice that I automatically added the stage, but you notice it did not populate the name. I never have caught on to why sometimes Eclipse does or does not do this. Maybe it's because I hadn't saved it. I'm not really sure. We'll see if we notice what causes it. But I am noticing the red underlines here that are indicating that I don't have a primary stage like formally declared. And really what we need to do is we need to take this exact name that we have here and drop it in this spot up here. And let's see if Eclipse even lets me do it. All right, there we go. And that should fix at least that one red underline, so make sure you get that done. I'm going to go ahead and preemptively save my work already because I just don't want to redo anything I've done. Why would I do that? And now let's go to the book and start reading what our objective is for this first exercise. And so you can see from just a really quick display that they have here that this looks a little bit familiar because we've worked with the deck of cards before. And notice it says, write a program that lets the user click the refresh button to display 4 cards from a deck of 52 as shown in figure 1524A, right? And then see, it says, see the programming hint in exercise 14.3 on how to obtain 4 random cards. Now here's the beauty. We did this exercise. So the wonderful thing is we don't have to recreate all of the work that we did. In fact, we're going to copy that stuff and then just add all the import statements, and we're going to be off and rolling really, really fast. And the biggest trick we'll have is adding that button and getting it to work. And that's really kind of the point here. They don't want you necessarily to worry about coding the whole problem. They really want you to focus on the button. And so I'm going to guide you through this. All right, so step 1 is let's open 14.3. So I'm going to go down here to one of my other projects and then locate that code. So I am seeing 14.3 right here. So let's give it a double click to open it. And I'm looking inside here and I'm seeing all this stuff. And I'm saying to myself, you know what? Yeah, this is the one that we had. In fact, this one only showed 3 cards, right? But it did show the cards and it showed them randomly. In fact, we even used the shuffle command. You guys remember all this stuff that we did here? And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to be a copycat here and just come down here and copy the code that I know works. So let's copy all of this and move it over, to our new application and putting it at the top of the start method. Okay. Now, it should at some point realize that I don't have these particular files available. And you notice right now it's not flagging it. But we do need to have the image and the image card stuff added to this project. And you can do it a couple of different ways. One temptation, of course, is like you can right click and copy this, right? And then just come up here and paste it into the same location. And I want you to notice, though, real carefully where it sits. It does not sit in the default package. It actually sits in the source folder. So if I'm going to paste it in here, I want to paste it into the source folder once again. Right? It wants me to save my work before I proceed. All right, now you can see the image card folder did appear there. So we're just letting it finish the copy. All right. Now, that's a big part of the work that we have to do, is just do that part of it. But where it becomes a little fuzzy is, okay, well, that's great. We copied our old code. Very good. But how do we get a button in there? And then how do we get the button to do something? And that's really kind of the main impetus here. So let's talk through the stuff that we already have and why it's there, just to kind of do a refresher. We talked a little bit about this method here. And it's not really a method. It's a collection of code that was given to us the last time we did this. So they suggested an array list with a loop that automatically puts a number into the array list, a list of integers, and then we run this built-in shuffle command that's part of the collections library that changes all the numbers that are put into that array. So 1 through 52 is in an array. This highlighted code shuffles all those numbers around, and then in order to get a fresh set of cards, we were pulling the first 3 cards off the deck. Now the first thing I notice is, well, we're upping that by 1. We're pulling 4 cards off the deck now. So you know what? We can do that really easy. In fact, the way that we'll do that is we'll just very simply copy one of these and just paste in another. And here will be the 4th one. And what we'll do is we'll just go to the 4th position in the array, or position 3, to pull that other card. Okay. Now, in terms of the structure that we're placing things into, just a refresher, we decided last time to use an H box. And you know what? That was a good shape because it's horizontal and you can keep putting things in there and they'll automatically, from left to right, go across the screen. And so adding one more card image isn't going to break anything, right? It's going to be fine. Now, we need, though, in addition to this, the ability to add another piece of screen, if you will, if you think of it that way, because there's going to be a container that holds these 4 cards, but then really we also need a container that's going to hold the refresh button. Okay, and I don't know if you guys remember my whole little spiel. We talked a little bit about what we call a border pane. You guys remember that? And how a border pane basically does this to the screen. And I'm kind of drawing over this, but maybe I should just use okay, let's use, let's create a blank document. Primitive way to do it. But if this is our whole window or our application, this would be our scene. When I use an H box, here's a mini version. The H box goes in there like this and fills the space. If I were to add a second H box, I could fill additional space, right? So that would be one inclination. But how you add them to the screen is actually kind of funky to control, because another H box wouldn't necessarily appear below. It could appear to the side and all these other issues. So that approach on the left is not one we want to use. So that's not what we want to do. But what we're going to do is we're going to use this thing called a border pane. And the border pane takes the scene and breaks it down. If you remember, has like a top bar, a bottom bar, a left area, a right area, and a center area. And because it divides the screen up into these 5 spaces, I can actually push anything I want into any one of those 5 spaces at my choosing, kind of controlling the screen layout. So if I want something to be at the top or the bottom or whatever relative to something else, it's just a matter of declaring which of those boxes I'm going into. So what I need to figure out, and maybe I shouldn't have erased that so quick, if I am doing that approach, so if I have this, and then the 2 side areas, I could decide to put the code in a number of different places. And one person might say, well, you could put the cards in the top one and the button in the bottom, or you could put the cards in the middle and put the button in the bottom. You could do it a number of different ways and they could all work. I'm going to keep it pretty darn simple, and you'll see as I proceed here what I mean by that. So let me get my mouse normal again. So here's the mouse, and here's what we're going to build. We're going to first declare the fact that I'm going to use a border pane to do this, and that helps, right? Because then you know where to put stuff on the screen. And I might actually decide to declare that way up here just to make sure that the border pane reads in before any other structure does. So I'm just going to declare border pane. And you know what? That's going to be the pane that I'm putting in my scene, by the way. Now, some of you are noticing that, wait a second, you got a pane here. That's an H box. What's up with that? Well, you know what? I'm going to change the name of that one to cards. And in fact, since I did that, I better just get consistent and just say cards on all of these right away, because that's really what should be here. And so now I'm naming the pane in what I would call a more meaningful way that indicates what's being contained inside of it. So I will still have an H box with cards, but now that H box will be placed inside my border pane, which is then feed into the scene. So the border pane really kind of becomes like the master framework for all of this. And so we're going to say new, typed correctly, of course, if I can do it, border pane. And then our parens for the constructor. Now, the way that a border pane works, yes, it does require a special library. So let's add the Javafx library. We have to determine which of those parts of the screen we're going to put things into. And I'm going to make the determination that out of that weird framework that I just showed you, that I'm going to put the cards in the center pane, and I'm going to put the button in the bottom pane. Okay, so here's how we're going to do that. We're going to declare the border pane up here so it exists, but then I'm going to come down here to add the other pieces. So down here, I'm going to say pane, and I'm going to tell it to set the center box of the border pane. It recognizes that it's a border pane. And what am I going to put inside there? My other pane called card. So you can put a pane inside of a pane. And it's not a pain to do. Bad joke. Okay.
I
Now,
mean, hey, if it works.
it didn't work that well. And then here for the bottom pane of the border pane, I'm going to put in my refresh button. Now, I haven't created the button yet. Hey, maybe it's a good idea to do that. Hey, let's do that. All right. So I've created my H box with the cards, added one additional card like we need, but now I need to create that button. So I will call upon the button class, and then we'll do a control space immediately to pull in the right library. Careful on this one. AWT is default. We're going to go to Javafx. And let's just call the button BT refresh. And I want to talk about this naming convention here a little bit. If you've ever studied any programming in the past, especially any GUI programming, there's kind of this convention that programmers use when they create what we call user interface controls, because that's basically what a button is. That you name the object you're putting on the screen according to what it is and what it does, so that you know just by looking at its code what you're dealing with. So it became a convention in many languages that if you're creating a user interface control graphically, that you either name it with like a BT or a BTN, all lowercase at the beginning, to show people that it's a button, and then usually finishing the name with what the button does. So this indicates this is a button that refreshes the screen. And where did I get that name from? Well, I got that from the book, by the way, because that's what they called it. So we're going to instantiate this new button, and inside the parens for this, by the way, you can put the text that will go on the button, which should say refresh. And then, of course, we'll stop that at the end of the line there with a semicolon. Now I can take that refresh button, and if I wanted, I'm just going to point this out, I could put the refresh button into a different pane if I wanted, and then take that pane and put it in the bottom of the border pane. Okay, that's totally doable, and some people would do that, by the way, especially if you want really specific layout control. I'm going to be a little bit more brute force than that, and I'm just going to take that refresh button and just manually force it into the bottom area of that border pane structure. So if you remember that little diagram that I was making. In fact, maybe it's not a bad idea to kind of refresh that a little bit. So the shape is this, right? Top, there's the center, and then the bottom, and then there's a left here and a right there. And so I'm putting the cards with the horizontal box here, and then I'm putting the button here. Now, one thing we'll notice very, very quickly as we try to render the stuff on the screen, just to see it, is that stuff might not appear exactly as you want it to. So let's actually save our work at this point, and I'm going to go ahead and run the program just to see how the stuff turned out on screen. Is it laying in the right places? Is it looking okay? Did I actually get 4 cards? Did they fit? All that stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and just run this as is. Crossing my fingers a little bit here. Hopefully all of it goes well. Okay, that's not too bad. I did get 4 cards on the screen, and I do have a refresh button that does nothing but sits very ugly on the screen, kind of in the lower left-hand corner. You must agree. That's not very pretty. All right. I'm noticing that 500 by 500 is way too big. I'm thinking maybe like a 400 or a 350 wide would make sense, and that something significantly shorter would make sense. So let's adjust those things here, and let's determine a size. So what should I try, guys? Maybe like 380. Does that seem good to you?
That's probably 380, 375-ish.
All right, and then what do you think for height, Jay?
Probably like 300. No, maybe 300 because it's longer width-wise than it is height.
Okay, well let's actually take a look, and this is part of the process that you guys can play with. Okay, that's a little closer, but I'm thinking maybe now more like 200 here. Let's save it. Let's try it again. All right, so you can keep playing with it until you get it where you like it. I might even say that, like, heck, probably like a 150 would work, but I'm going to go like 180. And I'm just going to stick with that for now. I do kind of want to make that button at the bottom, though, honestly. I want to, like, center it. I don't like the way it looks. And so very simply, we can come here and declare for the border pane, at least we should be able to do it with this, set alignment for what? The button refresh. Notice how like Eclipse automatically finds it for me too. Thank you, Eclipse. And then we're going to choose to position, and the command goes like this. This is kind of a weird command. We're going to position top center. So not baseline center or middle center, but top center. I don't want the button touching the bottom of the screen if I can help it, is my thinking. And you can play with the different positioning commands. You see how Eclipse does bring them up automatically, so you can try the different ones and see what they look like. It's not a bad way to figure out how they work. But I think that this will look pretty good. So let's go ahead and do this. Now I'm noticing it's flagging. Let's see what it says. Oh, I see what this says. This is kind of an interesting. It says the static method set alignment node from the type border pane should be accessed in a static way. But what it's saying is that I shouldn't use pane to refer to it. I should actually say border pane. I should actually type border pane. Here's what that means. And you should notice that the error goes away. Oh, it doesn't go away. Okay, well, you know what? Then I'm not doing it. How about that for a response, right? All right. Either way, although the yellow underline went away when I did that, didn't it? Okay. You know what? I'm going to leave it like that because I know that that's correct, by the way. All right. So I'm saving my code. And once again, I'm going to run this. And I want to take a look at how it sits now. We're just looking at the layout. Well, it could be nicer. But you know what? I'll take it for now. You guys okay with that? Okay. Good. I'm glad. Because we got the basic stuff on the screen. All right. Next task that we have is now that we have the button. So we've created the interface. And I want you to think about the steps I'm taking here. I created all the pieces that populate the interface and arranged it the way I want it. And if I was doing a real serious application, I'd probably spend many hours making it look just so. Probably coloring the backgrounds and, putting graphics in and all sorts of stuff. But now that I have that aspect of it done, now I can turn my attention to paying attention to what the button itself will do. And this is where we will start using our event handlers, folks. Now, the place where I'm going to choose to put this is right below where the button code is. The interesting thing about code like this, the only reason I'm putting it near the button is because I want it near the button where it was created, so I know that the code that I'm writing here relates to that button. That's the only reason it has to go here. Otherwise, the fascinating thing about working with event handlers is this. You can put them anywhere on the page because they don't do anything until you click on them. See? So once the whole program is loaded, it doesn't matter where the event handler ends up within the code. All right, so I'm going to trigger the event handler now by calling on this special method called set on action. And you can see how that's the first one that comes up here. And that now they're going to ask us to put in the event handler, and we can put in kind of the really long, complicated versions like the book shows, or ones that are really specific to doing really bizarre things. But all we have to do is that letter E, by the way, with this weird little dash and greater than symbol, which is our lambda expression. And then from there, we put in a set of curly brackets. That's the general form. And so what we're telling it is, this is what this really says. Okay, we have a button on the screen. Whatever button's default action is, which guess what a button's default action is? Click the button. Right, that's the default. Whenever you do its default action, whatever is between these curly brackets right here is what will happen. Okay, so now let's talk about what should happen when I click that button. In principle, at least. Any thoughts?
It would shuffle the cards again on screen.
And then redisplay them again.
Bingo. And you guys got both of the pieces. Very good. Bravo. Because usually people will point out one or the other. Yes. We will first shuffle them and then redisplay them. Well, you know what? I already know how to do that. Right? So the first part of my code. So I'm going to just come in here and I'm going to split the curly brackets to give me a spot to write my code. And so I know how to shuffle, right? This is the shuffle. Bingo. Hey, I got that one. Let's put that one in there. Step 1 complete. All right. Now we need to redisplay them. All right. Do we have any code on our screen that shows us how to redisplay? Well, we do. Okay. And I'm going to just go ahead and grab these.
Thank God for copy paste.
Yeah, right? Because otherwise you have to recreate all of that. All right. And this in essence really does it, because yes, we are shuffling and we are redisplaying. But here's the piece that most people will miss, and the book does talk about this. When you are putting stuff on the screen and you expect it to change, if I tell it to redraw the screen and redraw it back to the same object, what is the guarantee that the new version of the image is going to sit on top of the old version of the image? Is it possible that it might sit behind? It actually is. And so we have to actually perform one additional step here that you might not intuitively think about, and that is we will tell the cards pane to get children, but not have any, basically. We're going to tell it to clear. We're going to clear the space first and then redraw. So we're going to shuffle, clear, redisplay. And when does that happen? Whatever the default action for this object is. If you're doing something other than its default action, then you have to specify what that action is, by the way. But for a button, the default action is once you click it, so the button is pressed down, it will automatically trigger the code. So I'm just going to save this. I'm going to run it. This is actually completed, believe it or not. And now with any luck, if I hit this button, it should display 4 different cards in a different order. Does it appear to be truly random? It does to me. I haven't had any repeats.
So then if we were like using this for like submit or something, we could replace the E with like whatever that different alternate action is for the event.
Yeah, the most typical thing you do, Cody, is you usually go with whatever the default object action is, and
Sure.
for most of them they're pretty intuitive.
Right, it's a button, you click it. Yeah.
Right, but on occasion you might want to write an event handler that reacts to a hover as opposed to a click, and then so maybe the hover, all it would do is make the refresh text turn red, for example. In that case, the event handler would look different. We would indicate that we're using the hover event for that object as opposed to the default, which is a click.
Makes sense. Thank you.
No problem. Now, I will tell you, we stick with basics for the most part here, because you can accomplish most of what you want to with that. And it really kind of becomes almost a whole field study, just like it does when you learn CSS, right? All the different, things that you can do with all the different styles. Ultimately, when you start, you just want to get things to work, and then later on, you want to get really particular about exactly what it does. Hey, go for it, And that's actually part of the fun of graphical programming, is you can spend time on the interface, and beyond the logic. But this is the working code, folks. So let's just take a really quick look at it one more time. So those, screenshotting at home. So top code is code that we borrowed from 14.3. We created a border pane, created a button. We created the panes in the border pane to receive the button and the HBox with the cards. Then we set up the refresh lambda expression. So anytime that button is pressed, these commands will execute. Now, if you start thinking about what's possible with the coding that you've learned so far, maybe some of the applications that you even wrote on a console level. The thing that's really unique about this is when you write a console program, everything executes in a top-down fashion. So you one command, you do this, you do this, you do this, you just keep going down the list. But now here we have a piece of code that is just waiting. An event handler, the way it operates, folks, by the way, is it will just keep running in the background, waiting for the click. waiting for that action on that object. And it doesn't matter what code is executed in what order. I could take this code, put it at the top, put it in the bottom. It doesn't matter where it is, as long as it's in the start method and executing, it will operate and allow us to trigger whatever code is here anytime the button is pressed. So we're really kind of stepping out of traditional sequential programming here. And so when you get into GUI programming, there's this aspect of it that breaks some of the rules that you've learned. Now, every time an event happens, though, then you're back down to your top-down logic. Once that button is pressed, this code does execute sequentially, whatever it happens to do. But who's to say that one set of user interface code doesn't trigger another set of user interface code? So you can kind of see, you can go down the rabbit hole there a little bit too. So you could put event handlers inside of event handlers, and sometimes you do exactly that. You do. And then I would have you consider, as you think about a simple little GUI program like this that puts stuff on the screen, then waits for us to press the button. At least I thought I pressed the button. Okay, there we go. And every time you press it, it's really waiting for the next occurrence. Now, take that a step further and start thinking about your whole operating system that you're interfacing with. So really, this whole window that we see must be sitting there waiting for me to click and drag on it in order for it to be able to click and drag. See where I'm going with this? And the little buttons in the corner of the window are just sitting there waiting for me to click on them to minimize, maximize, or close the application. Or my whole operating system is sitting there waiting for me to click on start and then run and then shut down or whatever, right? And so when you think about how an operating system works or any graphical program, they are loaded with event handlers sitting there waiting for you to interact. So even when the system is sitting idle, there are snippets of code. This is a snippet of code that is running continuously while the application is running. And I think that's pretty profound when you start to think about it that way, and then start to extend these concepts out to your regular operating system. And this is on the most simplistic level. You guys all cool with this exercise? All right, thumbs up so far. Right. Let's move on to 15.2. So if you guys want to get ready to work on that one. And I'm going to go ahead and read the exercise here. Right, 15.2 is our next one. Yep. All right. 15.2 says rotate a rectangle. Write a program that rotates a rectangle 15 degrees right when the rotate button is clicked, as shown above. So we're going to create this sort of an interface, put the square on it, or the rectangle, excuse me, and then every time we hit this button, it's going to rotate 15 degrees. And I assume what we see here is after one rotation. So it would like go around a clock, basically, as we hit that button. Now I'm hoping that you guys see some parallels here between at least this interface and that interface. First of all, I think that we could probably use the same border pane structure. I think that that's pretty evident, because here we have a button at the bottom in the middle and then an area up on top where we're moving an object around. The stuff we're going to put on the screen is going to be a little different. It's going to be a shape as opposed to images that we're pulling in from a repository. But hey, either way, it's still an object on the screen that we can rotate visually. All right, so let's go ahead and get this going. So I'm going to come up here and do a right-click, new class once again. Let's name it exercise 15.2. Add our public static void main. And then let's get all of our standard things going here. Yeah, I didn't want that to expand, but there it is. Oh, I see what I did. You guys see what I did? I put it in the wrong spot. No wonder it did that. All right.
It keeps defaulting there when I first make one.
Why? I don't know. But let's move it here to where it needs to be. We're going to put it in the default package. And that's pretty easy to do, folks. So no harm done. All right. Let's open that up and do all the standard stuff. Am I getting to the point now where I don't need to explain these steps at least? You guys getting comfortable with this? I'm hoping. All right. So we're adding the start method. And see, it did it again. Primary stage is in primary stage, but let's go ahead and name it primary stage. And then let's also move this to the bottom.
Kind of doing this automatically at this point.
Yeah, and that's kind of my intent. I hope you guys are doing it automatically. I mean, if you watch my videos, I do it over and over and over again too. It gets almost like nauseating at times because it's so repetitive. Now, we need to now think about the structural pieces. Well, we do need, all this stuff, and we already identified as well that we're going to do a border pane, right? And all this stuff. So, I know this is going to be a little messy copying it in. I'm just going to copy all of this. I know that the border pane is still missing, but we'll add that in. Okay. In fact, I'm just going to add the border pane right up here at the top. Let's just say border pane. Okay, so that should take care of that. Now, we're not fishing in cards. We're going to fish in a rectangle, right? And are we going to have a refresh button? Hey, you know what? We will, but we're going to call it something else. We're going to call it button rotate, right? So let's go ahead and just kind of move all this stuff out of the way here. And once again, I'm going to copy a little bit of code. All right. I'm not going to call it the same thing, but you know what? I'm still going to kind of do this stuff. And in fact, I'm still going to kind of do this stuff too. So once again, I'm going to copy all of it. And I'm getting rid of some of it, so don't freak out to that. And I put way too many blank lines in here, but that's okay. We'll fix that. All right. I'm going to begin by getting rid of this stuff because you know what? We're not using it. We're not doing that at all. I'm not going to call it refresh. I'm going to call it rotate. And may as well change the text inside there too. And then I'm also going to change this to say rotate so that the underline goes away. All right, that's pretty good. So we have, very primitively, mind you, the border pane, the rough structure. We already have the button created, waiting with an event handler for whatever we're going to do with it. But you know what? We have to rotate the rectangle, but first we have to make the rectangle before we can rotate it. So let's create the rectangle up here right at the top of the start method. Let's create, call the rectangle class, add the library, so Javafx. Heck, I'm going to be boring and just call it rectangle, because it is. And I'm not going to have others, by the way. And then we're going to add the constructor here. I know from reading the Java docs on this that there's some parameters that we want to type in here to do this correctly. And so one, we can call it just a blank empty instance, but you know what? I know that's not going to cut it. Here's one here for the width and the height. Okay, that's helpful, but maybe this fourth one here, X and a Y, and then a width and a height would be good, because then we can position it also. And, well, would we position it? Now I'm kind of having some thoughts about this. Would we actually position this? Any thoughts on that?
How did you get that to pull up again? It was control. What was it?
Let me repeat that. I hovered over the class. It brought up this little box.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not doing it. Let me do it again. There it is. You notice in the bottom corner of that box, it says press F2 for focus. That means so I can go into the box. So I press F2 on my keyboard. Some keyboards do require you press function and then F2. A lot of the modern ones do. And then I noticed this little browser button here. And then that opens up the internal browser and brings in the Java doc.
Thank you.
Okay. Mm-hmm. All right. So I decided, and I've experimented with this in the past during class, that I'm going to use the one with 4 parameters. There's an X and a Y, which determine the horizontal and vertical positions of the rectangle. And then we have the width and the height of the rectangle. So the one thing I know for sure is by looking here that it seems to me that the rectangle is about twice as long as it is wide. That's my perception of it. It looks like, if I were to take this edge and multiply it by 2, it would be the same size as that. So I'm going to speculate on the size of this. And yes, I am using cheat sheets, so I have a little bit of the answer. I'm going to speculate size. First, I'm going to put in an x and a y of 0. But I'm going to say width of 40 and height of 80. All right. What might be really smart at this point is to actually see what that looks like. So I'm going to take this rectangle object that I've created and I'm going to drop it into the center pane. I want you to notice too that I do have this positioning thing set for the button. I don't have anything set for the rectangle. All right, so let's save this and see what kind of happens. Well, this has to be changed to button rotate, doesn't it? And you see the red underline. So let's fix that while we're here. All right, just so we don't get any errors while we're compiling here. All right, let's run this and see what the interface looks like so far. Yes, we will save. All right. That's not quite what I expected to see. Did you guys expect that you would get a rectangle that was filled in black when you created a rectangle? Well, maybe some of you. But yeah, that's what it created. That's not what the book is showing. So we got to fix that. Otherwise, I'm remarkably surprised that by putting in the coordinates of 0, 0, that it threw it right in the middle of the screen. But that's not a mistake, because the center pane of a border pane, by the way, will automatically center the contents in the middle without designating coordinates. And so if you wanted to experiment a little bit with the placement, what you could do is you could do this type of thing. You could remove those coordinates. I'm just showing you what ifs, and you'll notice that it still comes in the same spot. But there's a reason I put those in, and I think it has to do with the rotation is why we put them in. But we do want to also get rid of the black fill. But if I do that, I can set the fill color to white. So let's do that. Let's say rectangle dot set fill, and then color white in all caps. Oops. Like so. It will ask for a color library. It didn't prompt me for the tools like I thought it would, so I have to do the import manually. But there it is. Let's go ahead and save this and run it again and take a look. Uh-oh, well, I don't know if you guys can make that out. I can see a white thing there. The background's like a slightly darker gray than the box, but I can't see the edges of it. So guess what else we have to do? We have to also put what they call a stroke on it so we can see it. So I'm going to say rectangle.set stroke, and this is going to be black. Okay. Once again, let's take a look. Yes, let's save. And okay, that looks not too bad. Now we have to just now get it to rotate every time we click this button, but I think our interface looks marvelous. It looks perfect. All right, now in order to make something rotate, there's actually a command that's built in to the rectangle class, believe it or not. So with a rectangle, I can actually just tell it to rotate. This is kind of really silly. We just say set rotate, and then you put in your position with an angle. Now, how much did they say we should put in? 15 degrees, right? Okay. I'm just going to show you that this will actually work. So I'm going to hit the button, and then hit the button, and watch what happens. It'll rotate clockwise 15 degrees. Now watch when I hit it again. Why is it not moving? Well, the answer is because I've hard-coded the rotation, right? So every time I hit that button, it's going to go to 15 degrees and stay there. And if it's already at 15 degrees, it's not going to move. And so what we really need here is a variable. And so we can set up a variable to do that. So some people would create that variable inside the start method. Some people will create it up here, by the way, if they want to make sure that it doesn't get interfered with. I'm actually going to call it a private, so I don't want outside interference from other programs here or other methods. I'm going to preset the angle to 0. That'll be the default. And then every time I come into this application, I'm going to take that angle and change it. Now, if I'm starting at 0 and I want it to rotate to 15, what I should do, how did that get there? Okay, is say right here, angle plus equals, or angle equals angle plus 15. So if you guys remember that sort of, operator where you are adding right back to the same variable. So this is the same as saying angle equals angle plus 15. And then here, instead of a hard-coded value, we will just put whatever the current value of angle is. It will start at 0 when the program starts, and then every time we hit the button, it's going to increase 15 degrees. That will allow us to continue rotating it. So watch what happens now. We can keep adding to the rotation. Now this is pretty primitive, and I'm going to say maybe not all that impressive, but the fact that you're able to take an object and do that to it, and I can just keep clicking, 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 and it's rotating. One last thing as we finish this one is I'm noticing here how this is flagging yellow because this is, as it says, is never used. So why pull it in? You don't need to. I'm going to delete that. I don't see any other highlights or issues anywhere in my code. I think we're all good. I think the size is fine. I think it's working well. So I would call this one complete. All right, we're back from break, and we're going to pick up with exercise 15.3 now. And this one, you're going to notice, is the next one in the series. So we're going right through them here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, by the way. And with this one, we're going to kind of leverage up a little bit of kind of what we did here, where we get a basic shape, and now instead of rotating it, we're actually going to move that shape across the screen. And you notice that we're going to have left, right, up, down buttons, which is pretty darn cool, right? So now here we are going to be moving an object. Once again, we can anticipate some of the stuff that we need to do in advance, but we also want to make sure there's a special little directive in here that's a little extra to make sure that we check the boundary to prevent the ball from moving out of sight completely. So we don't want somebody to, like, let's say, hit that left button over and over again, and then the ball just keeps going, and it's like, on your next screen over 5 miles down, right? We want to write some code that's going to prevent that. And that's probably the trickiest part of this. But this is a fun little program to write because now we're going to add not one event handler, but 4. And then we're also going to put limitations to the movement. So this is kind of fun. So let's go ahead and start the coding process. So let's get over to Eclipse and get full screen here. And let's go ahead and add a new class file here. This is going to be exercise 15.3 with a public static void name. All right. You guys notice that this time I made sure I right-clicked here on default package instead of source, right? And that's what put it in the other folder before, for whatever reason. Let's do all the usuals. So we're going to extend application. We're going to add our start method. See, primary stage came this time. I'm not sure why, but there it is. We'll move the main method to the bottom. Put in our launch. All right. We're going to go and copy our stage and scene and all that. This one looks like it's not saved, so I'm going to save it. And then can we also agree right off the bat, I'm hoping you agree, that I think we can keep using the border pane here, right? Right, in the same fashion. So that's going to save us a little bit of coding too. So I'm recognizing basically a repeating pattern here. And so I'm not only going to copy the stage and the scene, but I'm also going to copy the border pane, realizing I will have to change the name of these objects and add some things, right? So I'm going to just grab all that for starters, and we're going to move it over to our new program. Some of this will ask for libraries. See, some of them followed. You guys notice that? The things that we don't have named yet will go into these spots, but we'll worry about that as we get to it. All right, so now I got to start thinking a little bit about how this really becomes different. Now, we have clearly found the ways that it's the same as the stuff that we've done before, but now we're really kind of looking at a different thing altogether. And so what I want to talk about here is a couple of different constructs that we're going to throw into the mix. And this will be a little bit weird because we're going to write basically a separate class file that will allow us to create a ball object. So we're going to treat the ball in a different kind of way. And the reason that we're doing this is by treating the ball as a separate object, it becomes easier for me to control its position on the screen so it doesn't fall off. All right, and this is probably the biggest leap for you guys conceptually. And normally if I were to create a separate class file, I would do that externally. And so what I mean by that is I would, in the same folder, I would just create a separate file, call it whatever I'm going to call it, and then I refer to it, and the project will pull it in automatically because it's in the same folder. So that would be the typical practice, and you learn that in Java 1 when you created objects and instantiated classes. Now, what we're going to do instead is I'm going to put that code for a separate class internal to the main class here, so it's basically only available to this program. I don't want external programs to have to contend with it. So I'm going to just call this a class. Notice I'm not putting a modifier of public or private here. I could make it private, by the way, but I'm just using my class directive. And I'm going to call this a ball pane. And so I'm creating basically a custom pane class that really extends all the features of a regular pane, so a generic one. And I'm going to put in my curly brackets so that the code is complete, so that class has its complete structure now. Although we are going to put stuff inside these curly brackets as we go. The primary thing we're going to put inside here is the ball. So we're going to create the circle, and so I'm going to call that right away. Add the library to build it, and I'm just going to call it circle. Hey, whatever, or ball. I could call it ball if I like. Now this new circle has to be constructed, and there are parameters that you can throw in here. So once again, I'm going to hover and get to the Java docs. So we're going to do an F2. I'm going to pull it up in the browser here, and let's do a little reading on this. If you remember with the circle, there's different ways. You can just define one, give it an XY and a radius, give it a center XY, a radius, and a paint fill. And I'm thinking, well, maybe that's useful. Or I can set those things separately, and now the one reason I'm going to kind of refrain from setting the fill is this within the declaration. I want to create the circle, and then I want it to move around. The things that would really move it around, honestly, are the XY position on the screen. And so I don't want to overburden the constructor here by putting in what I would call unnecessary stylistic commands at this point. But I do want to put in an X and a Y and a radius. Now, last time I did this, I used a radius of 15, and I used a screen size of 350 by 180, or was that left over from last time? Well, actually, that's what I used last time. So I used 350 by 180. So I'm just hard coding that there. Now, knowing that the general screen size is 350 by 180, and the border pane center is going to take up most of that space, I can kind of extrapolate a little bit as to the position of the XY of the circle. And so I could just kind of simply say, well, halfway through 350 is 125. Maybe that would be a good X. So let's go 125. Oops. And then if the height is 180, half of that is about 90, right? So that kind of seems like in the middle of XY, roughly, right? And I'm not trying to be precise about this. And then the third parameter would be the radius. I used 15 last time. That means the circle's got a diameter of 30 pixels, so that should be okay. Now, because this is a class now and not a method or a function, aside from creating the circle object, we also have to have a constructor function. So if you guys remember that from learning how to build classes, and the constructor function will always take the name of the class itself with a set of parens, either accepting parameters or not. In this case, we're not, because we're going to hard code this stuff. And what we're going to do here is this is the spot where we are going to make the circle appear and give it shape and color, basically. And what I mean by shape and color is we're going to give it a stroke and a fill. So let's do the easy part first. Setting a stroke and a fill is a piece of cake. So you can just say set fill, which we've kind of already done. Last time I did this, I made mine red. So hey, why not? Let's do it again. Color red. And you'll notice the library is asking to be called in here. So I'm going to do that. And then very similarly, we can set the stroke. And this time we'll do, just do black. That's fine. You want to get more creative with it, go for it. Okay. But here's the thing that's a little bit of a mind bender here, because notice that when I created the class ball pane, it's extending the pane class that pre-exists. You notice this one is calling for an import, so I'm going to do that. I'm going to pull in the Javafx for it. And so all this is really saying is that whatever features Pane has are also available to ball pane. But ball pane has something unique to it, and that is it's got a circle built into it of a certain size and shape and position. And it's got a red fill and black stroke because that's what the constructor does. But we still need to be able to see the circle. And so what we have to do in the constructor that's a little bit odd is actually tell the constructor to get children like we do normally outside of this sort of a construct, and then tell it to add whatever object we need. And we're just going to have it add the circle that we've created, just like that. And we'll close the statement. So this puts it on the screen, and then the other two style it. And then by virtue of just even calling on the class pane, a circle is created. And that's really kind of the majority of just getting the circle on the screen is this little bit. Now, I will have people that'll ask all sorts of questions about this. And yes, this is sort of a roundabout way to do it. But the reason that we're doing this is to demonstrate to you, kind of like reinforce the concepts of class and instantiation, and then show you that rather than write a whole bunch of methods up here in the main program body that would determine where the ball sits on the screen to keep it from falling off the edge, I'm going to build all that stuff directly into the object itself. So the object itself will monitor its own position and ensure that it doesn't fall off the screen. So that will be done through a series of built-in functions that I will create. Now, what I'm going to do to start these is I'm going to create one, and then the rest of them will follow in pattern. Now, I won't type all the code initially. I'm just going to kind of, in principle, create them, and then we'll come back and figure out the why the code is or should be the way it is. All right. So I'm going to start by just doing public void. So I'm creating a new method inside here. And when you look at a screen like this, oops, one too far, the ball has the possibility of falling off the screen in 4 directions. It can go off to the left, off the top, off the right, or off the bottom. And then, if you will, left, right, up, down, it could match the button directions. And you know what? While I'm thinking about that, could these not only prevent the ball from falling off the screen, but if we're in the process of seeing if it's falling off the screen, could we not also just go ahead and move it right away, right? But you can limit the movement based upon what's going on here. So I'm going to create the what I call the method stubs here with basically all their syntax but empty code. So we're going to want a left. I mean, you guys should be able to extrapolate this. We're going to want a right. And I like to make a little space between mine. We are going to want, let's see, one of the buttons says up. And then we want another one that's a down. So kind of like pre-creating this. So here's what's going to happen. So I'm building the circle. I'm pre-building its position on the screen, its shape, its placement into the pane, and then I was going to pre-build the limitation so it doesn't fall off the screen. And then it dawned on me, hey, wait, if I'm doing that, I can also at the same time, by determining during movement that where it's going to go, I can also move it at the same time. So in other words, instead of running all these different event handlers up here that would then dictate how to move it, I'm just simply going to call upon the object itself that has the movements built into it and just trigger them. So if you get what I mean. So it's kind of like if I have like a robot that knows how to move up, down, left, and right on its own, and then all I have to do is send it a command to do it rather than issue the command externally that details to the robot how to do it, right? It's already built in. Okay, so that's a little bit of a mind bender for people to stretch on, but once you see it working, I think you'll understand. So these are what I call the method stubs. So I have the structure is there, and then I will call them from above. Now, in terms of all the stuff that we got going on up here, let's try to get some of this stuff in order now visually to be able to get all the things on the screen that we need. The first thing that we did is we did create a special type of pane. This is our own class, by the way. And notice how it doesn't flag red because we already created it. It's below. It's in the program. And I'm going to call this the ball. And then we're just going to say new ball pane. And we don't need to send anything to the constructor. The constructor is already kind of pre-built. Now, we do need to put all those buttons on the screen. And if you kind of go back to what we did in this program, we just kind of brute force created a bunch of buttons and named them, right? And then we added event handlers. And you know what? We can kind of use that approach again. So I'm just going to go ahead and just grab this button code. So I'm just going to copy and paste this over. And I'm going to make all my buttons right here below the ball pane. All right. Now, because I did a copy paste, it brings the library with it, which I think is pretty slick, right? But if it didn't and it's highlighting red, be sure to add the Javafx library for it. Now, I'm going to do these buttons, but these buttons are all going to have different text on them, right? These are going to be left, right, up, down. All right, so you know what? I'm going to have to paste in 4 of these. All right, so I already did 1, there's 2, there's 3, there's 4. And now we're just going to go through and just name everything. We're just going to do this very methodically. So we're going to do, I think on the screen they go left, right, up, down. This part's pretty easy. Naming things is a piece of cake. And then we'll have a button up. a button down, and then we'll make sure that the text matches. Like so. So now we have our 4 buttons. Now, if we're going to take all these buttons and put them on the screen, in the previous example, we just brute force added the button to the bottom pane. But if I add one thing to the bottom pane and then add another thing to the bottom pane, it's not going to sit right. They're going to overlap each other. So what I have to do is actually create another structure to hold them. And for me, it just seems easiest to probably use an HBox to do this. So you notice I'm going to instantiate an HBox right here, and I'm going to call it buttons because that's what's going inside of it. And then we're just going to say new HBox. And then inside the parens here, if you want to do some spacing, you know, however much space you want between those buttons or around those buttons. And I usually use a safe number of like 5 or 8 or 10 or something like that. Today I'm going to use 7. I don't know, just because. Just seems like a nice number. Let's go ahead and add the library for HBox if you don't have it already. And now that we've created the HBox to hold the buttons, and I have my buttons, now it's time to put all the buttons in there. And so I'm going to say buttons.getChildren, if you remember that one. And then because there's multiple objects to add, I'm not going to say add, I'm going to say add all. And then I'm going to start adding each one of the buttons. So I'm just going to go BT left, BT right, BT up, and BT down. And so all those objects will appear inside there. Another thing that I'm already aware of too is that when I put them in, and if I don't position them, they will left justify, by the way. And I don't want that. I want them to center. So I'm actually going to put in a centering command here. So I'm going to say buttons.set alignment. And we're going to say POS for position, center. And the library was automatically added. Okay, so this is an HBox that holds all the buttons, positions them in the center of the space. Now this object here that we created with all these buttons, we're going to feed that into the bottom part of the border pane. So buttons is going to get copied to the bottom part of that border pane. So we're going to drop it right in this space here. So buttons, and you see that red underline went away. In the center section, we are going to put what? What do you think we're putting in the center section?
The
The ball.
HBox itself?
No, somebody said it. Who said it?
The ball pane.
The ball pane. Very good, Jay. Cody, the HBox holds the buttons, and the buttons are going in the bottom part. Right.
Sorry, I'm tired.
No, that's okay, because this is why I asked the question, because sometimes I do these things and I want to make sure people are latching on to where I'm going with it. And so we created this whole fancy ball pane class. So what's going to go in the center section is the ball itself, which happens to be a pane that contains a ball with a position that we can move. You know, so that's kind of a neat little way to look at it. The other thing that we're going to do here is you notice that I have this little command in here that is setting the alignment of the buttons to top center. And we're still going to continue that, but instead of applying it to a single button, we're applying it to the whole pane of buttons. Okay, so in essence, in many ways, our interface is kind of done, believe it or not. And we could, if we want, take a look at this point. Should we take a look? Yeah, I think we should. I think it would be a smart thing to see what it looks like so far. So let's do a Control-S to save, hit that play button, and get this up on the screen. And so there's the ball. And the position that it showed up in was predetermined, by the way, by this little bit of code. If you're okay where it started out, just leave it alone. It doesn't matter. I speculated on position, remember. But I could tweak those numbers. So if I wanted to appear a little farther over, like try to get into the middle, I could do that. Not that big of a concern to me. Right now, none of these buttons do anything, right? But they sure look nice. ish, whatever. They are what they are. All right, so the interface looks good. Now our task is to get this thing moving. We're going to do that with a series of event handlers. And I'm going to kind of, once again, demonstrate this concept that when we're working with an event handler, I'm going to grab kind of the rough code of it here. And actually, there's so little code, maybe I'll just recreate it from scratch. Not a big deal. Let's do that. Now, where I'm going to put the event handlers is, notice I have the ball pane gets instantiated, the buttons get created and put in position. It's all dropped into the border pane, then it's put on the screen. And then so far, the last time we did this, we put the event handler like above the scene or whatever. But you know what? The reality is once the screen is displayed, it doesn't matter when I really create the event handlers, I can put them anywhere. So I'm going to put them actually underneath the stage and the scene stuff. And I'm going to just one by one address each one of the buttons. I'm going to start with the left button. And I'm going to say, once again, set on action to trigger the default event handler, which is pressing the button. Once again, we're going to put in our lambda expression and a set of curly brackets. And then all the code that will execute will be between these. Not too hard to figure out that every time I do this, I'm going to also need to create one for right, up, and down. And yes, I'll clean all that up. And then I'm going to rename them all. Notice it doesn't mind redundant event handlers. It doesn't flag them at all. It kind of figures, well, you want to do that again? I guess go ahead. It's really kind of how Java treats it. But really, these need to be corrected. So this should be right. This should be up. And this should be down. Now the question is, what am I going to trigger? So the one way to do this is if you created a circle manually, you could put the code in here to move the circle. But what we're choosing to do is instead to call the method built into the ball pane class to have it happen. So since we created a ball, right, an instance of ball pane called ball, all I need to do is refer to its method. So if I want it to go left, I'll just say ball.left or ball.right or ball.up or ball.down. So you see like why we do that is it helps to simplify our code here. So normally people would do this. They would say ball, and then you pull in left. See how it automatically finds it too. And that's the whole command. All the work will be done below. And then some people will even choose, instead of splitting it like I did, will even choose to write it like this. Put it all on one line and make it super efficient. In fact, why not? Let's do that. Let's make it super efficient. I didn't do this in the last time I recorded this video. And I forget if I even demonstrated it, but you can do it all in one line. So let's just continue with that process. Okay. Right, we need parens here. Okay. And I think we're pretty good there. We're missing a semicolon there. There we go. So that's all of our event handlers. Now the only code that's really left to write is what will move stuff on the screen and not cause problems, basically. Okay, so now if you did a little bit of reading in this chapter, they have a pretty extensive section on like moving objects, getting the X and Y, and then setting the X and Y. And in most of the objects that we'll contend with, like this circle that we pre-create, we'll have the circle works with a center XY position and then a radius. And so really what we're going to be moving is those center XY positions. So in order to determine how we're going to set those, we're going to write code here to first probe the object to get the position and then adjust it and set the position. So this is really kind of bizarre how it works, but it goes like this. First, we call upon the object itself, which is the circle. And ultimately, what we're looking to do here is move it. So we're going to say set center X position. And yeah, you could hard code it here. All right. But we're going to do something a little bit more complicated. We're going to say, before we set this position, we need to know where it sits on the screen to make sure it doesn't fall off. So for example, if we were already at X equals 0 and we told it to move left, the potential is that it falls off the screen. That's kind of a problem. So before I move it, I'm going to ask it first to get the position of the circle currently so we see where we're at. So this is kind of bizarre. So in order to set it, we have to get it. So we're going to get center X for the circle. So we're going to retrieve its current position and then check to see if it is greater than the radius of the circle plus the stroke, which is 1 pixel. And so really that adds up to 16 pixels. I'm checking to see, is the center position of the X currently greater than 16? Because if it's greater than 16, then I can go ahead and move it. And what they do here as a recommendation, and this is how the author approaches it, and I like this approach, is they use this if statement that's built into this code, but and I think they call it a ternary if, I think is the correct syntax for this. And so what it's saying here is basically the form of a true-false statement. And what I'm doing here, and I know this isn't proper code, I'm just saying if true, and then over here if false. And what I mean by this, these are not coding statements, by the way. These are in plain English, if you want to just look at it that way. This weird kind of statement, and Teresa, I think you had asked me about this during one of our support sessions. What does the question mark mean, and what does the colon mean? Well, this is what it means. So what I did with Teresa the other day is I did this little diagram, and I think I still have it on the screen. Oh yeah, I do, right here. And so I showed her this. I'm like, normally we write an if statement in Java or any language, and we say, if this condition is true, then we do something, whatever it is. Else, we do this. And a lot of programming ends up being like, you check to something for true, and you do one thing or another. A very, very common action. Not like 20 steps, just one, in the true part. And so that can be rewritten if you look at these symbols, that this is the part we're checking for truth. This is what we do if true. This is what we do if false. All right, so with that in mind, coming back over here, I'm setting up my statement to check and see first, is the center of X greater than 16? Because if it is, if true, I will allow it to move. Right? So here I will allow it to move, and otherwise I will not, because I don't want it falling off the screen. Okay, so it's got to be greater than 16, otherwise it's not going to move. So the code for me to do that is going to look like this. So I'm going to start by determining, once again, if I'm going to move it, I need to know where it currently sits before I can change its position. So once again, I'm going to say circle get center X, right? So that'll just pull back a number. And if it's not at the edge of the screen, I'm going to allow it to move 5 pixels to the left. Otherwise, if not, so in other words, if it's already, at the edge of the left edge of the screen, I'm just going to keep it at 15 pixels. It doesn't get to go any farther left than 15. In fact, I could argue it should probably match up with the other number in 16. 15. Okay. All right. So just to reiterate, in order to set the new position of the circle in the new center, I first probe it to see if it's greater than 16. If that's true, then that means I have room to move. So I will take that center position and subtract 5 from it. And then if not, then I'm just going to leave it at 15. You don't get to go any farther. All right, so this is kind of a little bit of a thing. So each button press is going to do this. I'm going to set the center of the position by checking where it is now, making sure it's not on the edge. If it is on the edge or if it's not on the edge and there's room to move, we move it. If not, we stay at 15. All right. I'm not trusting this so much yet, and you guys probably don't either. So let's go ahead and save this and try just that one button. And so here it is on the screen. Now you notice the other buttons won't do anything, but the left button will. And because I preset it for 125x, I should be able to hit it a whole bunch of times before it gets to the edge of the screen, and now it's maxed out, and it doesn't get to go any further. Isn't that cool? All right, so if one works, now all we have to do is convert this phrase to all the other situations. So let's do that. Let's create the right movement now. And the reason we're doing right next is because a right movement also works along the x-axis. And so the beginning part of the statement is going to be identical. We're still setting the center x. We still need to get the center x and then determine, are we looking for it to be greater than 16? Here's where it gets weird. How do I know how wide the window is? Because if I'm starting on the left edge, I start counting at 0. Now I got to compare to the right edge of the screen. And the problem with the right edge of the screen, so even if you look at like this card thing, is that people have the ability to change it, right? Unless I lock my window. And so this position doesn't change, the 0, but that one does. So what I have to do instead of hard coding a value here is I actually have to probe the width of the screen. So I have to get the width of the screen on top of it all. So this is kind of a different solution or different solution approach here for this one, where we are now going to probe the screen width in order to determine the position that we need to get. So here's how we're going to write that. So we are still going to look and compare to the center of x, and we are still looking for this value of greater than 16, but relative to what? Or is it greater than? Well, we should talk about that. In this position, instead of the 16, which is a hard-coded value, you can do that on the left side, not on the right. I'm now going to say get width, and it probes the current pane for its width and returns a number, an integer. And then we will subtract from that width, whatever that width is. Let's say it's 400. We're going to subtract 16 pixels to give us that same amount of offset. And should the comparison be greater than or less than? Well, it's pretty obvious. In this case, we're working with direction. So the center of the x needs to be to the left of the right edge of the screen. So it should be less than the width minus 16. Once again, we're going to make an adjustment depending. If it's all the way to the right, we can't move any farther right. But if it is less than 16 pixels from the right, we will allow it to move 5 pixels in that direction. So we'll add 5. In terms of what the limit is, we have to follow the same approach we did here for the limit. So I'm just going to copy that whole statement. So instead of hard coding a 15, we're going to say get width minus 16. And I think I did 15 for a reason, so it keeps the ball from jumping, I think is what my rationale was. Right, so let's give this a try. You notice that this is getting to be a really pretty long line, by the way. So if you want, and if it's helpful for you, some of you might choose to do it like this, with the statements like this, where like the true or the thing that you're checking for truth is on the top line, and then the resulting statements are on the second, just easier to read. If you can fit it all on one line, I would encourage you to do that. Up to you. Of course, you can always word wrap it, but I just want to make sure you guys are seeing the entirety of the code here. I'm not trying to obscure it from you. All right, let's test this and see if it works. And you notice my technique here, once again, is write one thing. Let's see if it works. We know the left button works, and it goes all the way to the left. So let's take it all the way there. It still stays. Now we're going to go all the way to the right. We're just going to keep clicking. I've got to click really, really fast here. Where's my mouse? There it is. I'm playing Minecraft or something. And there it is on the edge. Hit the edge and can go no further. So that one's working too. Now we need to apply the same logic to the up and down, and we're done. Okay, so this actually will go pretty quick. I'm going to do both of these in one fell swoop, by the way. Yes, I am copying these statements, and I realize that if I'm going up and down, now I'm not changing the center X, I'm changing the center Y. So all of these statements will now adjust. So I will say center Y to set it. I need to first get its location. If I'm working from the top of the screen down, well, I start at 0, so I can stick with the original statement of greater than 16. And then that will be okay. And then to change this aspect, that will go to center Y. And if there's room to move, we'll allow it to move up the screen. So a negative would be up. And then we'll put that same limit in a 15. For down, it's going to be the converse, kind of the same way we did with the other one. So we are going to have to probe screen height in this case, or pane height. And so we'll paste all the same stuff in, just make a couple of alterations. Here, we'll reverse the sign, and we're going to say get height minus 16. And then in this case, we won't be going in a negative direction. We'll be going in a positive direction or away from the top. And then we'll set our limitation here the same way, where we're going to use the same statement we did to determine the position in the else part of the clause. And folks, this should be it. So I'll leave it here for a second while you guys are frantically typing in the code, right? I know how it goes. So I'm going to very slowly save and then really, really slowly move my mouse up to run the program so we can see it. And I'll move it out of the way once it's running. So you guys can still see the code, right? And then I'm just going to test. Does it go up? It does. Does it go down? It does. What happens when it reaches its limit? It stops. What happens when it reaches its limit? Let's hope it stops. Right? And then, the other thing that gets kind of interesting is when it's at the limit. So you notice how I make it taller. Does that still work? Yes. And in fact, these are kind of fun to play with because it shows you how the get width and the get height, for example, allow you to dynamically probe information from the window, even as the user is changing the window. That dynamically adjusts. And so we're going to move all the way over. And it worked. Okay, so we're not falling off the screen. I'm able to go up, down, left, right. And we met all the parameters of the assignment. And then I'm hoping, what this does is it gives you a little bit of a creative impetus, what other stuff you might be able to do. But just like the simple thing where we're checking the screen width and how close the object is to the edge of the screen, these are very, very simple GUI mechanics. And when you think about the video games you play and how complex their mechanics are and how everybody had, all that stuff had to be thought out, folks. Somebody had to program all that stuff in. And it starts like this, doing a manual code just the way we're doing it here. All right, I'm just going to kind of rifle through the code here really quick for the screenshotters, right? So here's the top part of the code with all the libraries. The beginning of the start method, actually the entire start method, the main method that launches everything, and then the ball pane class with its built-in methodology here that both checks screen position and makes the move all at the same time. Now, one thing I'm going to just kind of point out about this code before I move on to the next exercise, and I think this is important for you guys to understand. I've had students say, well, Ty, you're setting the center X position by running an if statement inside the parameters. Is that the best way to do it? Well, I think in terms of writing concise code, it is, because it all happens in one statement. For some of you, it might make more sense to maybe even perform each one of these steps separately. So in other words, you might create a variable that might hold the result of this calculation. And then you might write an if statement that compares it to this calculation. And then depending on the result in the if statement, have it make the maneuver, right? And in a separate statement here by feeding a variable to this command. That's totally doable too. And for some people, it just makes more sense in the brain to do it that way. And I think where I lose people on this one sometimes is the fact that we're doing the if statement on the fly inside the parameter. But it is feasible if you wanted to separate out this if statement into a traditional if statement. So if you looked at, once again, that little example that I had before, you could do that. You could restructure it, assign values, assign this value to a variable, then feed it into an if statement, and then perform the action. You can do those things. For me, it's more efficient to do it this way, and a lot of GUI programmers do it this way because you're kind of doing it all in one fell swoop. One button press, one line of code, basically. That does also lead to faster executing programs. And when people are working with GUI stuff, they want stuff that's really responsive. They don't want to sit there and wait with every movement. And these are pretty simplistic commands, but this is, I think, helpful to know as you're building this kind of stuff. Anybody have any questions on this one?
Sounds good.
Okay. Well, thank you. All right, let's move on to the next one. This one is exercise 15.4. And this is one of these real classic, by the way, programming exercises. And you guys have probably, like if you've had like a JavaScript class, you probably have done this, right? You might have even done this in a Python class. Maybe not in Python, it depends on who taught you the Python. But a very common thing to create basically an application that has, notice, once again, we have 4 buttons. So we see like a repeat in like format a little bit. But now instead of having, a ball or rectangle on the screen, now we're putting in text fields, labels, and text boxes that will accept values. And so we're going to allow people to put numbers into these boxes. And then after the numbers go into these boxes, pull those numbers out, convert them from text into a number, perform the calculation that they click on, and then display the result in the other box. It's a series of steps. Now, here's the reality. We are at 7:21, right? This isn't happening in 9 minutes, by the way, but we're going to get a start on doing it. And we're going to get as far as we can. So where you guys are going to pick up with this is you are going to have to go to the other exercise videos that I've published to see how to finish it, right? Because we won't have time during class to do it. All right, so here goes, folks. This is exercise 15 for the calculator. So I'm going to go ahead now and create another new class file inside the source folder. And this one will be called exercise 15 for. With our main method. Okay. Oh, and you see what it did to me? All right, we're going to fix that right away. We're going to just drag this up. Oops, we're going to drag the Java file from here to the default package, and it should auto fix itself. Notice how the package declaration went away. Thank you, Eclipse. All right, we're going to put in all our usual stuff. So let's get into the pattern of this. And you're going to follow all your typical application creation steps here, including adding the start method. I'm going to move my start method to the top. And we'll put in our launch directive here. All right. Let's also copy all the common components that we know we're going to need. And we can do a little bit of analysis here once again, because, hey, you know what? We're creating 4 buttons again. We're doing a stage, a scene, Looks like a border pane again. All those things are still true. And I just want to show you what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to copy almost all of this code to get this done. So why this can actually go pretty quick. And yes, I will correct things. So don't freak out to that. Let's just copy all of that code and pull it into the new application, just recognizing the similarities. Now, let's start by renaming the buttons. The buttons here are add, subtract, multiply, divide. So let's do that. Let's start changing these. So we're going to change it to BT add, subtract, multiply, divide. And we'll change the button text as well to match. All right. Now, this statement is all underlining now because we changed the button names. We need to change these names as well. So let's do that. These should also match. And of course, if you misspell anything, it will let you know. So fix it if you do. And so we have the buttons. And I don't think we need to do too much here. The H box that holds the buttons can be called buttons. It can be put in the same location. Perfect. No problemo, right? The scene is still holding the pane. The border pane is still there. We have 350 by 180. As far as I can tell, doesn't even need to be that big, right? Now we need to worry about creating these visual components, which are text fields and text boxes that we're going to instantiate now on the screen. All right, so that's going to take a little bit of different code here. And let's start by talking about another pane structure, one that we haven't used yet. And here's the thing with panes, by the way, folks, there's many of them, and they all kind of do different things. There's like stack panes, flow panes, H boxes, V boxes, border panes, and a few others, and I'm probably missing a few. But we're going to play with one now that we haven't worked with yet called a flow pane. And the reason I use this is a flow pane allows the stuff that you add to it to kind of naturally populate its structure sequentially, provided you follow certain techniques. Easiest way to say it. So I'm going to begin by creating that flow pane, and since visually it sits at the top of the application, or it's actually in the center part of the border pane, I'm going to put it near the top of the start method. So here we go. I'm going to create the flow pane. It's going to call for the class. I'm going to control space, pull in the Javafx library, and I'm just going to call it fPane for now. That will be a new flow pane with an empty constructor. All right. One thing I know about putting objects on the screen inside of flow pane, I'm doing this for time efficiency, by the way, is I know that stuff will touch each other if I don't tell it not to. So right away in the flow pane, I'm going to tell it to set a horizontal gap of 5 pixels. So everything will have at least 5 pixels in between. You want to make it a little bit more, 8 or 10 it's not going to hurt the world. So I'm going to go 8 on this one. I'm also going to want all that stuff, whatever is dropped into the flow pane, to center. So I'm just going to say fPane set alignment, and I'm going to say POS center. Libraries are automatically added. And now I'm thinking to myself, what stuff is going to go inside that flow pane, which I'm then going to feed into this spot. I guess I should do that. Well, I'm going to have text fields and labels, basically. So we're going to do this kind of sequentially. You can do this a couple different ways, and I like to kind of show different techniques as we move through, which is why I do some of the stuff the way I do. First of all, a text field, and a text field is the thing that you type the stuff into. It's the empty box, by the way. This needs a library. And we also have naming conventions for these types of user interface controls. So a text field starts with TF, by the way. And then I'm going to, on the fly, say this is the first number. So the first box that will take a number. So we'll call it num1, text field num1. And this will be a new text field. Okay. Well, I know that there's 3 of those boxes. And just so you understand what I'm building right now, I'm building the boxes that hold the numbers that the user will type. All right, so that's going to repeat 2 more times. And you know, I might think about how I name these a little bit. So we got the first number they type in, and then the second number they type in, and then the third one, I don't want to call it num3. It might make more sense to call it answer or result or something like that, because that's where the result will be displayed. The other thing that we have is kind of a formatting command, and this is kind of interesting, is if I just brute force put a text field on the screen, it comes out in a default size and shape. However, there is a way to control that size and shape. I don't want to give people the ability to type in like a 20-digit number, like 3 or 4 or 5 numbers is adequate for our purposes. So there's a special command here that I can call the text field by name and then set what we call a preferred column count. And so how many characters of text are allowed to be typed in. Now what the author did for theirs is they put in a value of 3 for each of them. And so I'm copying that. And for each one of those 2 text fields. Now, for the output text field called answer, I'm going to also set that, but because if 2 numbers are added or multiplied together, there's the potential that the number might get a little bit bigger. That one should be set a little bit bigger. I might say like 5 or 6 characters should be pretty good. You can set it for bigger. But you run the possibility, if it's too small, that somebody might, you know, multiply like 999 times 999 and come up with a number that exceeds the bounds of the box. So you might have to play with that a little bit to get the right setting. All right. Another thing that we do, now this creates the text field, right? So this creates the box that we type into, but we also need to make the other part of it, which is the label. And so I could create the label like this. I'm just giving you an example. This is not how I'm going to do it, though. I could say label, right? It'll ask for the library. I'd put it in. And then I would name it like, you know, maybe LB for label, N1 for the first number, something like that. So label, actually, I would say label num1. And then I would create a new one, and I would say label, and then I would give it some text like number 1. I think that's what they used, right? Number 1, right? Number 1. Okay, so I can do that. But when I do something like this, I'm creating it as an object, and it's occupying memory space, when really all it's doing is putting text on the screen. So a lot of programmers see that as highly inefficient use of memory. And so instead of using an approach like this, which people will do, and it's okay to do it this way, by the way. If you do it this way, you're not downgraded. But rather, what a lot of programmers will do instead of this approach, maybe instead of deleting it, I'll leave it there with comments. And believe it or not, I'm almost done with this program, folks, if you guys want to hang out for a couple of minutes and see the result. What instead a lot of programmers do is they recognize that what we're doing here doesn't require the use of memory space, and I can just brute force add label and what we call instantiate on the fly. So this is kind of a thing. Now you notice that normally I would say whatever stuff I want to put on the screen here, I would call it by name. So I'd go text field num1, for example, right? But I also want to put a label in front of num1. Now, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to actually split these parentheses, and this is kind of weird in itself. And instead of listing by name all the objects here, instead, I'm going to do a combination of instantiate on the fly and list the objects. So the first thing I want is a label, that actually says, hey, number 1, right? That was the first thing we're supposed to put in. And so I'm going to say number 1, colon, I'll even put a space after it, and then close that parenthesis. And then the next object will be the text field for number 1, okay? And then I want the next box, so looking at like what we're trying to create, I want label it says number 2, text box, label it says result, and text box. And so what I'm doing here, kind of, I think it's kind of clever. Most programmers think it is I'm creating the label brute force without a name, so it does not occupy the memory space. It just puts it on the screen and it's done. Then I will include the text field, which has to be an object because we're retrieving a value from it. And then same thing for the result. And then finally, the text field for answer. Okay, so those are all the objects going in. Yes, I see my spelling mistake. So that's our interface. And in fact, we do have enough now to get this on the screen and see what it looks like. So let's do it. Let's save this and at least see the interface be, oh, I got errors here. Wait, we got to stop. We got to figure out what those errors are. Oh, okay. So we have this code here that, okay, these buttons and event handlers are incorrect. So I will comment them out with a CSS style comment mark. All right, let's run that again. I just want to make sure that the interface looks good. All right. It could be better. It should be more like this. So we do need to make it wider. Let's go ahead and make that 400. And maybe it doesn't need to be even nearly that tall. Let's just make it 100. Save it. Let's do it again. See if that's a little bit closer to what the book has. All right, that works for me. All right. Now the next part is to allow people to type numbers in here. You can see you can already type. You just can't do anything with it. A little problematic. Okay, so the next major thing that we're going to do is figure out how to put in the piece that makes all the work happen. So we're going to uncomment this little bit of code here. Right? We're going to rename the event handlers. So what are our buttons? Add, subtract, multiply, divide. All right, so the interface is set. What is going to change, though, is the stuff that's in between the curly brackets for each one of these. And you notice what I'm doing here is I'm just blowing away that content inside here, preparing it to receive the rest of the code. So all the rest of the code that we're going to type is going to be in between these curly brackets. And all it has to do is retrieve that. The basic thing that we're doing is we're going to retrieve the text from the field, convert it to a number, and then perform the indicated math, and then feed it back to the answer field on the screen. You guys feel where I'm coming from. Now, because I am really short on time, and I do want you to see the result of this, here are the event handlers, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull in from my already answered code, the completed version, which I just pasted over itself in the other code editor. Code editor. All right, let's try that again. So here's the completed code, and rather than get into the details of this, watch the videos that explain it better. But this is the solved version, and basically what we're doing here is we're setting the text in the answer box by first parsing the text field to get the text. Whatever we get, we're converting it to a double. That's what the intro part of it says. And we're adding it to the converted text from the other box. And then we're concatenating it to a string. So it turns into a string. Remember that trick? And outputting it to the screen. So the funny thing is when people type stuff on the screen in these boxes, whatever you type in here is text. It has to be converted to a number first. and then you can do the math, and then you have to convert it back to put it on the screen. A little cumbersome, but that's what these statements do. So we have one here for add, subtract, multiply, and divide. So you guys can screenshot this really quick if you want, and then finish off your code, or watch the other video. I know some of you have classes to go to, and so do I, and I want to take a break before I start my next one. Any questions really quick before we adjourn for the night?
Nope.
I know that was a lot to absorb. There's still one more exercise. That one is recorded, and the solution is posted. So 15.5 is out there for you guys to watch. But take your time with it, and if you get stuck on anything, just shoot me an email, and let's set up a one-on-one Zoom and figure it out. Okay. Hopefully you guys picked up a lot of little techniques here. I know sometimes it's better to watch it live than watch a recording. I think, yeah, I agree.
It definitely is. Thanks, Ty.
For sure.
Thank you guys for being patient, and I will see you all next week.
Bye.
Goodbye.